maybe quarter after.
No problem. That's when we. So we were.
Okay, you're nice.
You just leave and don't worry about it. It'll be all okay.
Well, I'm not really too worried.
And it'll be all okay.
Before we get really started,
We are live.
Just in time.
well, I can still tell.
Oh, I know.
I'm not too fussy on it. But anyways, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday morning, April 5th. How come we weren't here on April Fool's Day?
No, Saturday, right, Sunday?
I've been thinking about something special.
Just doing
But
that.
anyways, April 5th, and we have Michael Grady on the screen with us this morning. And he worked on the amendment that we talked about on the nuisance bill. And so, Michael, is that something you'd like to run through for us?
Sure. I'll put it on my screen if you would like.
Yeah, that would work.
Okay. Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Is it not there? Oh, well, hold on. I think I might. Yeah, it's not there.
Copies of it, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. All right, I'll stop to share them. So what I've done in H205, or actually in the Right to Farm bill, is you had asked questions on how to determine the metric, how many times people are going to mediation prior to suit. And so one of the things I looked at were the annual compliance reports under the LFO permit, the MFO permit, and then the small farm certification, annual certification. So section 1 remains the same. It's that required mediation prior to suit, and that it has to be conducted according to the Uniform Mediation Act. And then the page 2, line 7, the person bringing the action shall provide the court with a sworn statement of an attempt to resolve the issue or dispute. And then the new section 2 is part of the LFO annual compliance report, the MFO annual compliance report, and the small farm annual certification. The secretary shall request the farmers provide information on whether they engaged in mediation with neighboring property owners to address the alleged issues of nuisance from the farm. Secretary annually shall report to you, the General Assembly, the number of mediations reported by farmers. That second sentence about the report, it doesn't have to be written. The secretary, she can just come in beginning of each session and testify as to the number of mediations reported by farmers. So there is a data gap because there are about almost 300 small farms that don't fill out the annual small farm certification form. So you won't be getting information from them about mediations, but you'll be getting them from the large farms and medium farms and the larger small farms.
That's
That's
in
it.
the report,
Yep.
Michael, section 2.
Yeah, that's section 2. Small farms underneath the threshold for certification don't have to report annually. They just have to be inspected every 7 years.
Um, Now, I think it was you that reported maybe, or that from what you found when you look back, there's only very few of these lawsuits had ever been filed. Did I remember that accurately, or?
That's correct. There aren't that many that can be found. It doesn't mean that that's the total universe, because Vermont Superior Court system until a few years ago wasn't posting its cases online. You had to know about the litigation. You had to request a copy of the documents from the court clerk. But those that got to a higher level, the Vermont Supreme Court, those are online and available, and there are not that many of them. There's only the 2 Trickett's versus Ox, the Stowe Pig Farm, there was another one, I can't remember the exact facts, and then the Airy Point case. So there's been about 5 or 6 that are
The chicken farm in Highgate, do you recall if that ever got to a court, or?
I don't think that ever got to the court. I think what happened is that the agency went up there and saw that they were storing their chicken manure improperly, and they ordered the farm to address it, move it so it wasn't creating the flies and the odors that were affecting the neighbors.
And
I literally went up there at that time, and I think it was something that they easily could have addressed from just my neophyte knowledge.
I went like after that product had been moved, and really you had to hunt to find a fly. And it was the same operation, but they'd taken care of the issue from what the ag agency had told them to do. It was kind of a modern type thing, and manure would drop downstairs,
Oh,
and instead of taking it out, it would build up, of course, in the basement. And then they'd clean it out, but they hadn't cleaned it out for,
Oh, that's what it was, that they hadn't cleaned it out. That was the big problem.
oh, it was black with a red light, yeah, it was not good. Well, are there any questions from Michael? Brian?
yeah, Michael, it's only my suspicion, but I think that the small farms would have less of a tendency to be in a situation where there might be complaints and eventual judicial processes. I'm guessing that, I don't know. It would seem that, some of the events that happen on medium or large farms might have more of a possibility to upset neighboring folks. The ones that you mentioned, the 5 or 6, were any of those small farms?
Well, the one in Stowe really wasn't a farm. It was just a person that was trying to aggravate and use pigs to achieve that. So I would say that person, yeah,
And
that
the
person,
ox issue, that was an Apple issue, wasn't it?
that was an Apple issue. They changed the way that they were packing. And then the new neighbors from away didn't like that. And then the other 2 were manure cases, Airy Point, and the other one, I can't remember the exact details of that one. Senator Collmore, I thought about it. I thought like, oh, the larger operations, the the LFOs, MFOs, and certified SFOs are likely more engaged in practices that might create nuisance. But then I also thought there are so many people moving to the state and buying houses that are not from here that they could buy a house next to a small farm and not like what that small farm is doing. And so I'm a little conflicted about saying there will be more issues with the larger operations considering the dynamic of real estate in the state right now.
All right, that's fair. I guess I was reacting more to the fact that because they only are every 7 years, we're not going to get that information. And I'm not that upset or concerned about that. So I think you ideally crafted a way for us to at least get a sense of how many we're talking about. And, you know, to the point, how many got resolved before the court had to get involved. And I think that's what we're trying to do. So I think congratulations on figuring out a way to get this done. That's good.
Any other questions for Michael? Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Have you, the Farm Bureau, have you talked with any of your farmer groups in regards to, you know, this is a lot different than the rewrite of the nuisance lawsuit bill. Have you had a chance to speak with any of your people in regards to this lighter version?
Right, I've been putting it in my weekly newsletter and no one has raised any concern. So I think we're happy with the mediation piece.
Yeah. And Jared, did you have a comment?
No, not really, Mr. Chair. Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. This looks good for the environmental advocates as well. Thank you, sir.
Stephen, do you have any?
Yeah, good morning, Senators. Steve Collier for the Agency of Agriculture. So, you know, we very much appreciate all the work that the committee has done on this bill. I think the mediation provision is a great idea. In our view, it doesn't address the problem. You know, the real problem is that the law does not provide clarity to anyone. And so because of that, it creates uncertainty. To Mike's point earlier, you know, in our experience, I would say the small farms actually tend to get in more conflict with their neighbors because they don't, and I don't have statistics to back this up, but just in our experience with the complaints, because the larger farms tend to be in more rural areas with a little more space, with neighbors who are a little more familiar with the farming operation. And granted, what Mike talked about is absolutely true. That's changing, and it's changing rather dramatically in some places, but it's a lot of times it's the smaller farms that don't have the substantial space, don't have, you know, they do have closer neighbors, they still are engaged in farming practices, and oftentimes that's where the conflict seems to arise. But we very much appreciate all the work you've done. I think to actually make the right to farm protection something that's meaningful, the law really needs to be changed. And I don't know what the way forward is for that. We've wondered if maybe a joint hearing with Senate Judiciary where all of these issues are sort of presented, and wonder if perhaps a compromise could be made. You know, I don't know the political realities of that, and we do appreciate your work. We were very pleased with the language that you crafted, that 4 of you, I think, support, that we think would create clarity, which is really in everyone's interest except for lawyers. So, yeah.
Rich?
What I'd say to that, I think we're better to do something than nothing and get people to talk to. Personally, and this is up to the chair, I wouldn't mind doing something jointly with judiciary, but you ought to take the lead on it. You know, so far we haven't had much luck in here getting them to look at this favorably. Maybe the agency ought to talk to the chair of judiciary and ask him to set something up. But that's only me, and that would be up to the chief.
Well, certainly, you know, we're into April, and if the committee would like, we could keep working on our original idea, because this mediation was part of what we had put into the original bill, but we could work. See, we didn't meet crossover, but I'm sure if we got it through here, the House would take it up. But we've got all next year. And we could work the rest of this season with judiciary and try to get our original draft bill that we put together in a form where possibly we wouldn't have so much opposition from judiciary. And we could do it that way, because we got this part done, I think, quite well. But I mean, even the other part was done, I thought, quite well. But we could work with Senator Sears and try to see what we'd have to do to get back to our original bill that this is part of anyways, so that there was some clear and decisive issues that you can point to bring a suit forward. Because I don't think any of us want to see a farm do nasty things to their neighbors, but we also don't want neighbors doing nasty things with no call to the farmer. And I think Michael raised a good point on the small guys. You know, they didn't buy up all the land around them. So they, in the future, they could be getting more pressure put on them than the big guys that own hundreds and thousands of acres. So I don't know if any of you have got an opinion on that.
I wonder if it makes sense at all to, of course, if you go both paths, I mean, this gets everybody somewhere. Doing the mediation doesn't mean that the committee couldn't keep working on the other pieces of it, two separate bills. I don't know. And then the other thing is, maybe it does make sense. I think Senator Weston's idea of having the agency talk to Senator Sears and just say, what's the path forward, you know, from your perspective? And that would certainly answer the big question. You can come back later this week and just tell us what the path forward is from their perspective. That would be helpful. And then if there's that path forward, you know.
Well, I'd rather keep control of the issue in here than vote part of
Something
it
out.
out. And, I mean, this is a pretty soft landing from where we started it. And
I keep going with this, but you know, how do we get the issues from the agencies and from the perspective that we see in front of judiciary so they can see it?
you mean the whole issue?
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
That'd be interesting if you just you chat with Senator Sears and just say, what's the path forward, and come back later this week. Kind of interesting just to see what their holdup is,
well, or is there a holdup?
or is there now? Yeah.
Well, and, you know, in the afternoon, I'm on the same committee with Dick, so I can chat with him too. So I think we'll just hold on to this until we have a further conversation with some, and So with that, I guess we'll leave that one in that folder for the time being. I didn't ask, Emma, you came in a little late.
Sorry,
But you caught the tail end of the
I did.
discussion.
I did, and I'll get caught up.
Okay, yeah. So, we'll move on to, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll move on to 205. Stephen, you have some testimony in regards to that. Well, Michael's on a limited schedule here with us, so maybe you can come up, we'll get Michael one first. So, Michael, did we have you doing any work on that for us?
Yep, you asked me to work with Abby and the agency to move H205 from the standalone grant program at the agency and incorporate it within the Working Lands Enterprise program.
Is that
And-
RAP 2.1?
Yes, it is.
And we all should have. Yeah, do you want to run through that?
Sure. And I'll share my screen since I think it's up on the website. Hold on. So, there's two sections that are added to the Working Lands Enterprise subchapter in Title VI. The first is just 4608, the specific assistance for small farmer diversification and transition. This is no longer a quote unquote program. So it's part of Working Lands. Before, when it came over from the House, it was the Small Farmer Diversification and Transition Program. But as with that program in H205, as it passed the House, there shall be awards to small farmers with grants to diversify production on a farm or to transition from one form of farming to another. And the grants shall be used for diversifying farm products, transitioning the applicant from one form of farming to another, processing of farm products on the farm owner controlled by the applicant, and developing an accessory on-farm business by the applicant. As with the House passed bill, the maximum amount of a grant would be $15,000 per farmer per year, and all projects would need to be completed within 12 months. I think that's that $15,000 a year cap is a question for you all. If it's going to be in Working Lands, do you want a cap? Or does the agency feel like they can do more without a cap? So I think that's a policy decision for you all. And then in sub C, you have the definitions. What is a farm product? It's crops growing or to be grown, including those traditional ones that are in the definition of farming. And most definitions, it's plants grown for food, feed, or fiber, Christmas trees, maple sap, horticultural, viticultural, or orchard, and pasture. It is also livestock born or unborn, including goods produced in aquaculture, or it's products of crops or livestock produced by the small farmer. And then small farmer means any person who satisfies one or more of the following. They earn at least half their income from farming as defined by the IRS. They're engaged in farming as defined in Act 250, regardless of the size of the parcel, and they have a gross income that equals at least one half of the farmer's annual income. Or they're a small farm subject to the required agricultural practices. And that means that If they're raising livestock, they have to have the minimum number of livestock under the RAPs. If they're producing crops, then they just need to produce $2,000 or more in income from the sale of agricultural products.
But to meet the required ag practices, I think you have to have greater than 49, isn't it, or 50 and up, or is it fewer?
So if you're preparing, tilling, fertilizing, planting, protecting, irrigating, and harvesting crops for sale on a farm, then you have to be 4 acres or greater. If you are raising, feeding, or managing the livestock on a farm that's no less than 4 acres in size, you have to have 4 horses or more, 5 cattle or more, 15 swine or more, 15 goats or more, 15 sheep or more, 15 cervids, 50 turkeys, 50 geese, 100 laying hens, 250 broiler.
Laying hens?
Yeah, 100. Yeah.
Could we get the hens down to 4?
Like the acreage?
So you can be pretty small and still, if you wanted to transition to a different type of operation, you'd still qualify.
Yeah, you would still qualify. I mean, and that's part of the reason the first 2 subdivisions there, A and B, the House committee wanted to focus on people who were quote unquote really farming and not kind of your back to the land subsistence. The people that were really farming, but they also wanted those small parcels. And with those small parcels, it's going to be hard to have that 50% income or meet the 50% income requirement. So that's why they added that 3rd subdivision, that they're a small farm subject to the RAPs. So that doesn't have a 50% income requirement, but it does have the acreage. It does have the livestock number limit. And if you are growing crops or ag products, it's $2,000 or more in an average year.
Yeah, well, and that's not a lot of small crops. You can get a couple of $1,000 pretty easy off strawberries, or even sweet corn adds up pretty quick.
Well, maple is farming, so maple's pretty profitable these days. So you can make $2,000 off of maple pretty quick.
Yeah, so, yeah, you wouldn't have to make a whole lot to get to 2 great.
So then there are additional subdivisions. They can't house more than the number of animals specified in the small farm definition and statute. So that means for cows, it's 199 cows. They can't have more than that if they do their medium farm. And then last, they can't be permitted as a medium farm or large farm at the time of application. That was included to clarify that a small farm could grow into a medium farm or a large farm, but it can't be one at the time of application. And then the second section, in talking with Abby Willard yesterday, she raised some issues about if the applicant is providing tax information, such as they made 50% of their income from farming as defined by the IRS, that the agency would like some provision to address the confidentiality of those records. And so following on the Public Records Act exception for tax returns and I coordinated with Tucker Anderson, who's the public records officer for the General Assembly. This section would say a tax return and related documents, correspondence, and certain types of substantiating forms that include the same type of information as in a tax return and that are submitted by an applicant for financial assistance under the subchapter shall be exempt from public inspection and copying under the Public Records Act and shall be kept confidential. So just because somebody applies for a small farmer diversification grant or even for a general working lands enterprise grant, and they provide information regarding, say, their profit from the previous year, or their income, that information does not become public in the application process.
Well, I think that was good to have that put in there. The House didn't have that section, right?
No, the House didn't have it, and there are other general Public Records Act exemptions about tax return information and or personally identifying financial information. But with regard to the personal financial information, that's a balancing test. It's not just it's confidential or not. The court looks at the interest in the public of disclosing that information versus the interest in the person asserting the confidentiality of that information. I didn't think you wanted a balancing test for someone's profit from the previous year. And I don't think the agency wants to be engaged in that analysis either. And so it's just a specific exemption for the tax return and other similar financial information that the agency receives in this application process.
Questions from Michael from the committee?
I do have one. I left the appropriation section in that the House had, which was $350,000 in general fund in fiscal year 2024. I wasn't real clear if you wanted that to stay in or if you wanted this new form of assistance to be within the general working lands enterprise board appropriation.
Well, any way we do it, when it gets to the they'll get snapped out of there.
Right. That's what I told the House committee. I told the House committee that it doesn't really matter what you put in because ultimately one of the appropriations committees is just going to take this section out and deal with it in the big bill. And so they were warned.
Well, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So with the deletion of the appropriations, would it become less likely to become session law? That's my first question. And then the effective date of July 1st, maybe it doesn't matter at this point anyway. I'm just thinking if you had a project that might be timely in terms of being able to get started on it right away, you know, for the planting season or something, I don't know whether we could move that upon passage or whether it really matters. Just a question.
So I think you could make the assistance program the session law if you wanted to. I think it provides more kind of transparency if it's in statute. But at the same time, if you're going to treat this as a pilot program to see how it does, then session law might be more appropriate. I think the confidentiality provision, because it would apply to just more than these small farmer transition and diversification grants, it would apply to any application where tax documents or similar information is submitted to WeLab. I think that's a good addition. And I would keep that in statute.
Okay.
And then with regard to the effective date, and I just tiered it to the fiscal year of 2024, but I see your point, Senator Kyle Moore, you could make section 1 effective on passage, and you can make section 2 effective on July 1, 2024. So an applicant could start their application prior to the appropriation of the money, but then they could get their money after July 1, 2024.
Okay. So the way I understand working land zone, they have like two time periods.
Yep.
They put out money and the money's all gone. And I don't mind having the crew that runs working lands run this, but it should almost have its own appropriations because they get millions of dollars more in requests than what they have for money. And these little guys that are going in for 10, 15,000, 5, 10, 15,000, they aren't gonna have professional grant writers writing up their proposal, and they could just get tossed out. Whereas if they're in their own category with their own little plot of money, but I mean, if we do 20, say we do 20, that's 300 grand. That sounds a lot better than 350,000 and 22 or 3 grants. And to get started, I would think the 300 would, because the house didn't put any money in, right? Or did
They
they?
had 500, I think.
They started with 500, and then the appropriations committee cut it down to 350. That House committee wanted 250 in base and 250 in one time, and the appropriations committee said no base, but we'll give you 350 in one time.
Okay, so this is one-time money.
It's one time, yep.
We gotta leave it at 350. And there won't be an argument with the house, we'll just have an argument within our own house. Yeah, so I guess we better leave it right at the 350. If a probe's over there, put it in at that. But we have several other requests in down in our approach committee that we're hoping to get approved, so.
Yeah, but they also, and I haven't got the sheets in front of me, but my recollection is that, and we need to sort through that the request from the administration and the agency was what they had the whole 10, but they also had the section for working lands, and I haven't got the book here. That was requested in the budget that was way higher than the budget that came out of the house.
The house.
Yeah, I think there was like 3 million for working lands as an increase, and I think the house was 1.
I think the house did just do one.
The house number is 1, and they took the 10 million down to 5.
Right, so the whole of the, we've gotta sort through and think what we wanna do with that. I think whatever goes to working lands for this, we need to put a fence around it. What I'm most interested in is working lands. Once you get that money there, somebody's gotta go through all these forms and everything. And working land seems to be the best place with the expertise to go through grant applications. that's why I think, you know, they've already got 2.5 people, they've got a board, they've got all the stuff to do.
It's all set up.
So it's all set up. I don't know how the House in their proposal thought the money was gonna be distributed.
Well, they didn't have it set up.
Well, there was language in their bill that said it would be administered by the staff of the Working Lands Program.
You know, that's
So,
kind of like dropping it in their lap.
so we could, yeah, we could leave that 350 going to Working Land with some parameters around it. So that that 350 would have to be used for this program. We'd have to write that into this bill or into the money bill, Michael.
I think you have either option. I can't speak for Senator Kitchell, but prior practice historically, she likes to take these kind of individual appropriations out of bills and put them in the big bill. But you can do it either way.
It'll be gone either way, but if we set it up to go to Working Lands with the fence around it, Richie mentioned.
Yep.
And the language would be pretty well set to go. And Stephanie would know,
Yep.
how to deal with it if it was right in the bill as we ship it down there.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've worked with Stephanie on language like this in the past and to get it to the Appropriations Committee's satisfaction.
Yeah, is that something that you'd have time to fool with, Michael?
Sure. I mean, when you say a fence around it, is the language that's in the draft in front of you a suitable fence?
Well, I think we'd want to have it that the money would and if it's one-time money, does that automatically mean it's general fund or could it be some of this federal money?
Well, the language says it's general fund.
Yeah, but there's a lot more ARPA funds than there are general funds. We're running really short on general funds down there.
I think I'd have to talk with JFO about the eligibility of the ARPA funds for this. But from my recollection, economic development of this kind, I think you could probably qualify. But I would really want to talk to JFO about that.
Would you want to check that out? And if we can use one-time money, try to work that language in, and that would be used. It would be used specifically for this program.
Sure. Yep.
Anything else from Michael?
No, I just, Michael's question about the fencing. It's fine with me. Richie was the one that sort of had I don't know if you had a question, but.
No, I think as long as we state that the dollars are, this spot's gonna be for this.
But I think this.
And I think that this gets that puts a fence around it for the Working Lands people.
Yeah.
And then they've got that whole process of how they vet grants. And that made total sense to me, that they should vet the process in a similar fashion to what they already know how to do.
That makes sense to Steve?
Yes.
Okay, you guys.
So we're gonna just need to know that the pot we're taking the money from.
Right. Okay, I will reach out to Stephanie right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything else on this? And the effective date, we'll leave it at July.
Did you wanna up the 15 to 20?
Well,
That'll work as well.
That's for individual grants.
so,
Yeah, I don't expect all of these are gonna be exactly 15.
well, that would be the max.
Right,
You want max it at 20?
you brought 20 up, I didn't know what you were thinking.
Well, if you had 15, well, I was thinking if you let out 15,000 and you had 20 applicants. Right, if you had 20 applicants at 20, then you're talking 400,000. So we can't do, I'd rather do more applicants and a little less money. So.
Well, okay, I don't,
I mean, that
they
might-
do have flexibility in this to give,
more or less.
more or less, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't,
Well, you think it'd be better at 20,000?
I have no idea.
You're
I
the-
think a lot of it, I think 15,000, it's hard to do most anything with just 15.
Well, then I'll take 15. I might be able to make that even 20 by the end of the week or.
Yeah, for you, I'm just saying, you can't do much in this world for now for 15
Well,
bucks.
it doesn't go as far as it used to.
Yeah.
If you want to do 20, it's fine with me, and hopefully some of these grants would be less than they could do.
If you're saying with 20, we would be giving out less numbers.
Well, if everybody matched out,
Yeah.
you know, the best you could do would be 15, 16, well, 7.
I wonder whether the House got the number 15 too, but maybe there's a reason. And if we change it, now we got
And
another
we gotta argue over
long
that,
contention.
yeah.
Does anyone have an idea why they had 15 and not 16 or 18 or 20?
I don't know why they might.
Did
Uh,
you-
The,
Go ahead, Michael.
okay, sorry, I thought somebody else was talking. The sponsors of the bill, Representative Surprenant and Representative Graham, thought that for small farms, this was an appropriate amount for what these small farmers were trying to do. And they didn't want to basically make the program so attractive to larger farms by having a higher amount.
Okay.
Well, I just stick with the 15.
Yeah, me too.
I'm. No opinion.
I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I'm glad. So
Irene,
Sorry, go ahead.
does Working Lands have any data about the applications that you get? Small firm versus larger?
Good morning, Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. We don't specifically track small farms because that's not, it's defined in some realms and not in others. So for dairy farms, it's pretty well defined for animal numbers, but in other areas, it's not necessarily defined.
Yeah.
We did put together, and I'm hearing this third hand, but I think maybe for the legislature, put together an assessment of the funds given since 2018 from Working Lands, and our estimate was that about $1 million in grants since that time went to small farm, quote unquote, small farms. That definition is a little bit malleable, but we definitely have been funding small farms through Working Lands. Keep in mind that until recently, the base for Working Lands was only $594,000 a year. So recently, since the pandemic, there's been kind of an explosion in money put through Working Lands, but that's atypical for the 10 years of the program now. It traditionally was only about $500,600,000. I'm not even sure if it started that high, but so there's been a lot more money. And as I understand it, we get about $10 million in applicant requests per year. So there's plenty of demand. The question is how to allocate the resources.
Well, and I thought Abby testified to the fact that these higher numbered dollar requests, they had more talented apps put in because they judge, part of that is on the quality of the application, and they can afford to put money into a professional or somebody that's pretty clever about putting the requests in. So they get the money. Well, these guys are asking for pocket change. They aren't gonna be able to go hire a professional grant writer to.
That brings up the issue that I'd much rather have some short form grant.
Yeah.
Than a 19, I've heard as much as 19 or 20 page grant that people have to put together when you're asking for 100,000 or better. And I'd much rather see them have, if you're only asking for 15, a shorter form.
Well, and we appreciate that this committee's work to put this through the Working Lands program, because as you said, Senator Westman, there's no alternate program set up for this. And we do think it's better to have a structure that's used to evaluating these grants, have people who are used to evaluating the competitive nature. We also think that this would give us room to have a simplified grant process. We have to figure out how to do that. We haven't done that yet. But obviously, if you're applying for a $5,000 grant for a discrete function that will allow you to do, one simple thing, that doesn't take as much thought about whether $100,000 of taxpayers' money or $200,000 of taxpayer money is going to be utilized in a responsible way. So we do, the Working Lands program now, we do require a business plan, and we do require some documentation about how you're going to use that money, which all makes sense in terms of public accountability. But I agree with you that if you're asking for smaller amounts, there ought to be a simplified way. The board will have to decide that. We're not the board. We are on the board, but we're not the board itself. The board is a statutorily created group of folks who have to make these decisions. So it's not like the Agency of Agriculture unilaterally decides how to do the grant applications, but we're instrumentally involved in that process. And we chair.
I would just say, normally, when you put together a budget and you put a dollar amount, and you don't put it all down on paper like that, what happens is in joint fiscal, in the budget, we put together a document that is called an intent document. And I think it's the intent of everybody in this process and the legislature that this is a simplified form.
Yeah.
So Irene,
Hi, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thinking about the bigger picture with all these dairy farms that are struggling, I just wonder if we would want to bump the number of dollars for setting aside back up to say 500,000, only because I don't want to see dairy farms coming back in a year saying we're still in trouble. Why not give more dairy farms and others the opportunity to switch, get out of a business that seems like it might be challenging for the foreseeable future?
so, Michael, are there some changes that you can make for us yet, or have we beat around the bush enough so we don't know where we are?
Well, I think one thing you want to know is the ARPA, whether the one-time ARPA funds are
Wow.
eligible.
Have a better shot at it.
Yeah,
what the
I
money
think,
runs.
yeah,
Yeah, so if, I think we ought to shoot for one-time funds and if possible, do ARPA money, if that's allowed under the rules.
Okay. So I've already reached out to Stephanie and Sarah Clark, and when I hear back from them, if they say it's okay, I can make that change at your direction.
Yeah, that would be fine.
And then I could put language in to say that the application process shall be streamlined and accessible to applicants. With that said, they may need to provide tax information, and tax information, gathering that and submitting it is not always the easiest thing, but they could do that just as an attachment. And then it will honestly be about the criteria that the board comes up with, because they do have their own discretion to set criteria and application requirements.
Brian?
Next, Mr. I just want to go back to Irene's question. Irene, were you proposing that we give more to dairy given?
No, just more in general,
More in
assuming
general.
that if there are people in dairy who are feeling like the trajectory is not good, even if they are made whole for last year by our other bill that we're considering.
Yeah.
If they feel the writing's on the wall, that
They need to
that
transition,
they need to
Yeah.
transition,
help them out.
that I don't wanna be setting aside another 6.7 million next year for more dairy in crisis, if we can set aside, say, the 500,000 that the House asked for in this bill. To encourage more people to think outside that dairy box or whatever other box they might feel that they're in, and so I just thought.
Well, I can see where a small farm might decide milking these cows twice a day, I'm tied down. It might be better for me to get rid of the milk cows and switch over to beef. And then you can tend to them, before work or after work and go get a job. So, in 15 or 20 grand would help them make that transition. Because you're gonna have to change, your watering system.
Right.
And things because of freezing in the winter and beef running and help. That would help them do the odds and ends if they would need to
Transition.
switch to growing produce.
Or
So,
starting a nursery as we
Yeah,
did last Friday,
that's right.
or whatever, whatever it takes to encourage them to think differently, because we do have plenty of milk, we keep hearing that from.
Well, they
There's
find
plenty of
that's-
milk out there, so.
They claim that's why the price is so low, because we got too much of it, so.
Right, so maybe that makes it all,
Which
everything.
even when it's short, the price is still short. But then, there's other issues with the milk pricing that we tried to fix. But anyways, so I think we're all set. Michael, Steve, did you have comments? If you want to stay on, you're more than welcome, Michael.
Okay, I have to leave in about 10 minutes though, if that's okay with you all.
I just have a couple of quick comments if I may, but it'd be great to have Mike here for this discussion. So first of all, we think this works, and as said, I think it's better. We think it's better through the Working Lands program. One thing is, if you're using ARPA money, it's not going to be simple, even if it's available. And I understand the impetus to use it because it's more readily available. It will not be a simple process. Whether or not it's even can be used for this process, I'm not sure. I know Mike's looking into that. But the federal grant makes everything more complicated. So if you really want,
Reporting back and.
there's just many more requirements. There's also more restricted uses. So even if it's possible, it will not be simplified, even for these smaller grants. Another way, though, I think that we could simplify this application is really understand the whole point of the income eligibility requirements right now. Because as Mike said, with the RAPs, there are many different ways to make the threshold, including if you have 4 acres of land that you're tilling or 4 acres with certain numbers of animals. But the easiest way to be subject to the RAPs is that you annually sell $2,000 in agricultural products, or you file a Schedule F with your tax return. I can't think of any farmer who's going to make more than half of their income from farming and not be making at least $2,000 from the annual sale of products or filing a Schedule F. So I feel like that whole income eligibility thing is just more onerous for the farmer potentially. They could still submit under the, excuse me, the RAP provision, but if it doesn't gain anything, I don't really see the point in putting it into the bill.
What I don't know if we heard it this year, but we've heard it in previous years, if not again this year, is one spouse or the other works off the farm.
Yeah.
And they may make $60,000-$70,000. And so if you do a joint return with your taxes, the off-farm spouse, working spouse, does earn more than the farm, and then they wouldn't qualify. So it might be better if we could figure out a way not to count the income as necessary requirement. We've heard that a lot.
Yeah, we
about
have.
this one spouse working off.
Pays for insurance and helps. They get the insurance that way, you know, the health insurance.
Yeah, and you add all that
benefits,
in, you
yeah.
know, like say if one is a school teacher.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be the wife or the husband, and the other spouse stays home
On the farm.
and tries to run the farm. It'd be pretty easy for the off-farm worker to subsidize the Dane farm. So,
Well,
so Michael, can we write that up so it doesn't include that income factor?
Sure, you can take out the 50% income requirement. That's not a problem. And then, so the requirement would just be that they're a small farm subject to the RAPs.
Yeah, and you know, you've got the 4-acre thing or something in there. So
Yeah, that's part of the RAPs. Yeah.
So we would delete line 17, 18, and 19 on page 2.
Yes.
what do you folks
I
think?
think that makes a lot of sense.
What about the second?
And it helps in the application process, not to have to get your tax returns from the year before.
Absolutely, and to that point, I still appreciate the exemption that Mike crafted, because for other working lands programs, sometimes tax information is required, not usually, but sometimes profit and loss statements are required. I actually think it'd be great to have what Mike crafted and put, I think he used the word tax information and related documents. It might be good to have it be related financial documents because of that balancing test that Mike talked about. Everybody who gets a grant from the state, that's automatically public information. So if we give money to somebody, that's public information. But we don't believe that somebody should have to disclose their personal financial information publicly to be able to apply for a grant. So if you made it clear that tax information and related financial information is exempt, then we could get things like profit and loss statements when we need them, and we wouldn't have to disclose them if their neighbor wants to know about it.
So on page 3, line 9, instead of a tax return, you're suggesting we insert financial
I
documents.
think tax return is good. Oh, you do? Yep, because tax returns could, because they need to be exempt, and it's good to have that, but I would just say, I think right now it says, I don't have it in front of me.
Because related documents, you want to say related financial.
Related financial documents, meaning whatever financial document somebody needs to submit in order to apply. So it could be a profit and loss statement, which is not necessarily a tax document. It could be construed that way, but I think if you just put financial in there, it's clearer that people's applicants' financial information and tax information is not subject to public copying. I don't know if Michael thinks that causes any consternation for anyone else, but.
No, I don't. I was just using the default. I was using same terminology that's used in the Public Records Act tax return PRA exemption, but I think it makes sense to say a tax return and related financial documents, correspondence, and substantiating forms that are submitted by an applicant for financial assistance under the subchapter. So it's both the tax return and the related financial information submitted by the applicant.
So there's just one more thing, if I may, raise that when, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
On the same note, the first line on page 3, it talks about at least half of the farmer's annual gross income. Does that also fall into that problematic category that if the farmer files a joint tax return? The farmer.
Yeah, I think you're deleting that.
I'm also deleting 20 through 20. Are you saying we're deleting the second bullet under A as well as the first one? Is that what I'm?
Yes, that
Okay.
was my understanding.
Okay, great. So we're only actually going within the third.
Right, the small farm subject to the RAPs.
Okay, so the language in 16 is going to change too, right? Because the only thing they have to satisfy are the RAPs.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
So the final thing I'd like to raise, and I don't think anyone will be able to solve it today, but it raises a really important question. The way this grant program is set up, we would be allowed to give grants for accessory on-farm businesses, which we support. We think they're really important to diversification and farm success. We'd also be able to give grants to support farm products. And it doesn't say those farm products have to be principally produced on the farm. So the reason I raise this is normally we give grants to support quote unquote farming within the definition under Act 250. All of those farming activities are exempt from Act 250. So when we're giving farmers money, they can farm, they don't have to get an Act 250 application or a permit. With this language as drafted, we could be giving money to farms that would be subjecting them to Act 250 jurisdiction. Because if they, well, I'm not saying we don't want to do it, but it raises this really important question about what can farms do if we're trying to allow farms to be farms and be profitable. What can they do today? Things like agritourism, things like having events that feature agricultural products and practices and still be part of the farm operation. Right now, if you extend past farming, you can be subject to Act 250, you can be subject to municipal jurisdiction, and you can be subject to our regulation. There's a bill that Representative Sims proposed in the House that our agency supports. We worked with the NRB on it. It's H128. It addresses this actual issue, which is to harmonize these definitions so that if a farm is selling somebody else's agricultural products, because right now, if you're selling somebody else's agricultural products, that's commercial. If you want to sell your neighbor's carrots, that's an Act 250 permit, which we don't think makes a whole lot of sense. If you principally produce the carrots, you can sell them without an Act 250 permit, so you can sell 51% of your carrots and 49% of your neighbor's carrots and still be farming. But if you want to sell your neighbor's maple syrup because you have the best location on the road where you don't produce maple syrup and you're doing an improvement, you need an Act 250 permit. We think that stymies agricultural product sales, which are important. 6 or 8 or 10 farms ought to be able to get together and have a roadside stand where they all can sell their products, because you need that kind of critical mass to get people interested. So there are ways to fix this. Don't cost the state a dime. They're just clarifying the regulations and harmonizing them We think H-128 is a really important bill. This just raises that question. Do we really want to give a farm a $5,000 grant that then makes them subject to Act 250 jurisdiction on their farm? It may not be their best choice. Now, they can make that choice, but they ought to make an informed choice because it's going to cost them probably much more than $5,000 to go through that process. So it just raises this larger issue about what is farming today, and should we recognize that farming is changing, has to change, and redefine it so that farms can still be farms while expanding their repertoire.
Can I ask a quick question?
So,
Well, I
yeah.
don't know, depends on. So who like that 250 cents and all that?
But I am concerned. So if all of a sudden, if you want to sell something, you and your neighbor, both farmers want to get one of these grants and collaborate on a farm stand that sort of sits between the two of you. And it's a very small footprint. I mean, farm stands generally aren't big footprints. And use that, you bring your syrup, you bring your carrots, that would
If it was on the carrot farmer's land.
yeah, and you're bringing your syrup
And
over.
your syrup comes from the neighbor, there's no way that you're gonna outsell the maple syrup price-wise or dollar-wise. So sure, you could sell $1,000 worth of syrup pretty easy, but you might only sell 500 in carrots, so your farm stand would have to
Move.
yeah.
It has to go on the other,
250.
it has to go on the other property.
So you wanna build your farm stand.
I know.
Or chickens on somebody's got.
Well, it does see, and I could be wrong, but it would be interesting to see House Member Sims's bill, just to see if there's something there that.
It addresses this exact issue and so in 2018, I think the legislature passed the Act 143, which is the accessory on farm business.
Right.
Go ahead.
So I just gotta get this in my head. So
Yeah.
the farm stand is there.
Yeah.
And they take a product from a neighbor, somebody that's in the area and put it in. If that product outsells theirs, then they have to get back to 50.
It's even, in my opinion, it's even worse than that. I think the only way to evaluate it is a product by product assessment, because what farming includes the sale of principally produced products on the farm. So whatever you make, you can sell, and that's farming. But there's no allowance to sell somebody else's agricultural products. Somebody else's products you don't principally produce. So if you're selling your neighbor's maple syrup or your neighbor's apples, you're not farming, but you're just there, you are just a commercial.
Yeah.
So why don't we put a one-liner in and strike out principally produced?
Well, there are a lot of ways to make it better. You could make the sale of agricultural products exempt. We haven't proposed that. We don't think that would probably get widespread support. But it could be. There's absolutely.
Well, I wouldn't call Channel 3 News and tell them,
You're gonna have a press conference.
yeah, I'd have I mean, something like that, you just stick it in a bill and,
Hope for the best.
yeah.
Well, H-128 takes a stab at solving this problem. It's not
Yeah,
perfect.
but she won't get it passed.
No, it's not moving.
Not so far. And we thought it,
We're past crossover. That bill ain't moving this year.
Does this affect farmers markets also in a
Michael,
way?
figure out a way
They're
we can
different.
write that up and tuck it in here. It might be a good try.
That,
Honestly, you would just be exempting stores from land use planning. Because that's all this would be, in my opinion. It's a store.
All stores?
so. All the stores sell syrup from most of the people in the.
Right.
Anyway,
Many farm stands are already circumventing the requirement. Act 250 is only initiated when somebody files a complaint. So I think it's more complex than saying 6 or 7 farms can all join together to have a joint farm stand, because that's a retail store.
Yeah. So how would we word it?
Interesting.
I
Maybe you'll better think about it. We'll have
Okay.
a conversation.
Well,
Sure.
as an example, under the accessory on farm business provisions, a farm can sell another farm agricultural products as long as 50% of the total sales are from the farm, it's from the home farm. So there is a tie-in. It's not saying there is, whether or not that tie-in is the right balance, I'm not sure, but it would allow you to sell from 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 other farms or 20 other farms, provided that you still are a majority of the sales on your own farm. So if you sold maple syrup and you sold some, apple cider, and you had some processed products and you had significant sales, you might be able to get 20 other farms' products in at a small level just to have that centralized location. But that's not under Act 250. That doesn't exist. That's just under municipal law. The towns can't stop that from happening. They can regulate it. They can't stop it. Under Act 250, like Michael said, I think a lot of people ignore this, but the reality is when
I
farms are
don't
getting.
think they ignore it. I don't think people have any clue.
It's confusing. It's really.
This is not ignoring. I think, if you said something to somebody and they go in the farm stand and say, hey, you wanna sell my syrup? I don't think people even think about it.
Not at all.
So I wouldn't say ignore.
Well, fair enough. We've had a lot of conversations with farmers in towns and others who are often shocked by the reality of the way that the current layer of regulations don't fit together.
Mhm.
And that, it's worthy of discussion, which is why I raised it. I don't-
If they were to, Steve, let's say there's a patrol person out there that's really looking at this, and somebody does come by and say, hey, you're selling more, what happens? Do they get a fine? Do they get,
The NRB,
Mediation.
right?
no, the NRB would have to decide how or whether to enforce,
I see.
and it could be fines, it could be requiring a permit, it could be, worst case scenario, removal of whatever improvement was made. I don't think that's their
I see.
typical approach, but
Right.
But they could require, and the challenging thing about once you have an Act 250 permit on a farm is where does it extend to? And there's been different interpretations about that over time. The theory has long been by some that once you have a permit, it covers the whole farm. I don't think that's actually the right read of law. Senator Starr actually, as I understand it, had an amendment back in like 2003, I think,
2002.
that said
Okay, I don't know.
that the permit extends only to the area that supports the commercial activity. But anyway, that's a different, another complicated issue.
Well, you're up at 10:30 again. And so, thank you, Michael. I
You're welcome.
You're probably late for your next meeting already.
Yep. Okay.
So we'll think about how we might be able to word that and so the farmer doesn't have to break the law unknowingly and it would be permissible to some,
Sure.
maybe
Okay.
under a certain amount of sales or something.
Okay.
But we'll take a short break.